What is going on, y'all? Welcome back. In today's episode, I want to talk about something that is a little bit more top of mind for me and my business, and I think it will help you all. In business, we constantly face difficulties. Over and over, we get punched in the face, we're chewing glass, etc., etc. Some of these difficulties are more challenging than others. And what I've realized is when we go through these difficulties, number one, it's important that we're learning the right lesson. Number two, it's important that we don't repeat the lesson, and therefore, in order to not repeat it, we have to make sure that we learn the right one. And then three, we have to learn how to act before the lesson is crystallized. And so, in other words, we have to learn to act despite incredible uncertainty. And what I want to do with you is share with you how I think about those things and how I am making sure that I am learning the right lesson, that I don't have to repeat lessons, and how can I continue to increase the likelihood of me having the ability to act despite uncertainty. And so before we get into that, if you're new here, my name is Ryan Rice. I run a real estate business. In my previous world, I was a W-2 employee for a Fortune 30 company for about 14 years. And I do all of this to both crystallize my own learnings as well as share them with you in the event that they're helpful. So how do we know that we're learning the right lesson? How do we ensure that we don't have to repeat it? And how can we increase the likelihood of acting despite certainty and do so more quickly? Well, before I answer those questions, I want to start by defining terms. I really like the definition of learning to mean same condition, different behavior. And if you are out there in the internet, you will realize that is not my learning, but it's something that I have taken and I put to use, and it's very much helped me. And so if our goal when we learn is to change our behavior in the next time the same condition happens, then that means we have learned. And so first, how do we know that we've learned the right lesson? A difficult situation happens, and then we walk away with something. How do we know that what we're walking away with is something that is actually going to move us closer to our goals? Well, what I have come to realize is the learning is right if it falls under these three buckets. One, if the lesson changes your behavior, then it's an indication that it's the right lesson. Two, if the lesson places blame or is focused externally, then it's an indication that it's the wrong lesson. And then three, if you ask yourself, if I do X behavior, will this increase or decrease the likelihood that I get to my goals? And the answer reveals that it will increase the likelihood that you get to your goals, then that is a good indication that it's the right lesson. So let me give you an example. When I started in real estate, I made a decision first of all, I bought a lot of houses in a very short period of time. And I made a decision to give a lot of those houses to one contractor. Well, the outcome of that situation was not good. The relationship with the contractor fell apart. And to very quickly summarize a very painful experience, I lost a lot of money. Now that situation is over, it is crucial that as I reflect and look back on that situation, that I ensure that I've learned the right lesson and that I ensure that it doesn't repeat again. And what I've seen time and time again happen in a scenario that's similar is the situation happens and the person who it happens to, oh, well, that contractor is a fraud and I feel like the lenders should be taking more responsibility. And essentially all of the blame is placed externally. And so the lesson that the individual learns is, all of these, if in the future, if I do this again and all of these external circumstances are different, then that will increase my likelihood of an outcome that I want. And so that is what I learn. And in all reality, basically what that means is that we are leaving the next time that we choose to do that, we leave it up to chance. And so then I think because we're logical people, what that actually transitions into is because it's left up to chance, we decide that we're not going to do it again, because why would we do it again if it's left up to chance? I want to pick something that has more certainty. And so basically what that means is I will quit. I will not flip houses again, or I will not try to do this again and hire contractors. That is a very clear example of the wrong learning. And that is not a learning that is going to move you any closer to your goals. And it's also a learning that focuses entirely externally. Like, you are not walking away with a change in your behavior, other than your behavior being changed is the fact that you will quit. And so the right lesson, of course, are all of the things focused on what I can do differently next time to prevent that from happening, or to increase the likelihood of an outcome occurring that is an outcome that I want. And so in that specific scenario, that might involve, for example, I'm going to ensure that I check better references. And what I mean by check better references is, instead of calling and talking to people, references of this contractor that have done a kitchen and bath remodel, and this specific job is a complete full gut rehab that needs all of the mechanicals replaced, that I will go talk to a reference who has done the exact same job and has done that job recently. And then I will evaluate whether or not I'm going to hire that contractor going forward based on my discussion with the individual that has hired that contractor for the exact same job, right? That's an example of the right lesson. I have the same condition. I have a full gut remodel that I am thinking about taking on. And next time, instead of listening to references of people that have done little partial jobs, I will instead go seek out someone who has done the exact same job that I am looking to do, and then I will make my hiring decision based on what that person tells me. That is an example of the right lesson. Another example of the right lesson from that scenario is, I will make sure going forward that I will not give one contractor 3 jobs until they have proven that they can complete 2 at the same time. If part of the reason of why we lost money is because the contractor was working many, many jobs at the same time and it failed, it would be very easy for me to say, hey, the learning is, well, that contractor sucks and that contractor is a thief, and so therefore I'm just going to make sure that I don't hire that contractor again. Well, that is not the right learning. The learning is, every contractor may want to do the right thing, and they may think that the action that they're taking is right, and therefore they will accept more jobs than they can handle. But instead of hiring them for multiple jobs based on what they say they can handle, I will instead hire them based on what actually happens, which means they do 2 jobs at once, they do those successfully, and then I will give them a 3rd. And so I hire them, or I give them additional jobs based on what they have done, not what they tell me. That is an example of the right lesson. And therefore, when I get into that scenario, again, I will behave differently. And I think this is really important, because what happens most, or what happens if we don't learn the right lesson, is it drastically increases the likelihood that we quit. And if we quit, then there is no lesson learned, because there is no behavior to repeat in the future under the same circumstance, because we're trying something different. And what happens when we do this is we go, if we're quitting that one thing and then we go try something new, what is inevitably going to happen is that cycle is going to be on repeat. We're going to do it, we figure out that it's hard, we learn the wrong lesson, and therefore we quit, and then we start it again. And then we do that for the rest of our lives. And so being able to recognize whether or not you're learning the right lesson is crucial, because it can be the difference of whether you stop or whether you keep going. And to dive into this further, then comes the question, well, how do I know, Ryan, when I should quit? Because are there not some circumstances where it would be better or more beneficial to pivot rather than push? Well, for me, how I think about that is, if the external circumstances have not changed, or there aren't some sort of drastic conditions that changed when you got into it, then the right thing to do is you push through the situation and you don't quit. So again, back to real estate. If the real estate market were to completely crash and let's say prices decline 20 to 30%, or there has been evidence that that has been happening for the last few years, well, then when you got into it, and by the way, it wasn't crashing when you got into it, well, now the conditions have changed. And so then it would seem plausible or it would seem beneficial for you to evaluate whether or not you should quit based on what's happening macroeconomically, based on what's happening with the market. But if the conditions haven't changed, and the only thing that has changed is your perception of how difficult it is, then the decision to quit is not going to get you closer to your goals. Because the same condition, the external conditions are the same. Nothing has changed other than your own perception of how hard the thing is. And so if the only thing that has changed is your perception of how hard it is, then in all reality, you have to view that as a good thing, because now you know how hard it is, and now you know what to do to succeed in the future, which means if you keep going and your behavior changes from what you did the first time, then the likelihood that you will be successful drastically increases. But again, what continues to happen is difficult things happen, people quit, and the behavior that they change is whether or not they keep going. And therefore, they learn the wrong lesson. And because they've learned the wrong lesson, they don't get any closer to their goals. So now that we know how to determine whether or not we've learned the right lesson and whether or not we should quit, what becomes even more and more important is how do we ensure that we don't have to repeat the lesson? There is nothing more that I hate most. I don't hate anything more than the fact that I have to learn the same lesson twice. And if that occurs, there is a fundamental breakdown of my ability to actually learn the lesson. And so I have been working on what is going to increase the likelihood in the future that I do not have to learn this lesson again. Or in the reverse of that, what will decrease the likelihood most of this same situation occurring in the future. And what's really helped me with this is ensuring that I document the lessons, because what happens in business is there are so many lessons. You could learn multiple lessons in a week, and then what happens is 6 months down the road, the same thing happens, and you look back and you're like, oh crap, that's the same exact lesson that I learned 6 months ago. And we get lost because this thing happened 6 months ago. A bunch of other things have happened and a bunch of other lessons have come up that we're trying to learn. And so we forgot the original lesson. And so then the same situation arises again. We do the same behavior and we have to learn the lesson again. And so what's helped me prevent this from happening is ensuring that I'm writing down every single lesson that I've learned. And I write out the specific behaviors that will change next time. So I have this Google spreadsheet, and in one column, it's the lesson that I've learned. And in the other column, it is the behaviors that I'm going to change. Or better said, in one column, it's the situation. And in the second column, it's the actual lesson and how my behaviors will change. The process of writing them in the first place helps ensure that I don't forget them. But now also, I have a reference point. I can go back and look and read all of the lessons that I've learned, which in my mind is going to decrease the likelihood that they occur again. And I think a reason I now have this fear is because I think back at my career with a Fortune 30 company that I was at. And there were so many countless lessons that I've learned, and I didn't document any. I didn't have any sort of documentation process on the things that I've learned. And I think if I did, I would realize that a lot of the things that I'm facing in business right now, I wouldn't have to relearn. And so having some sort of documentation process of how you are learning the lesson, what you have learned from it, is going to help you decrease the likelihood that it occurs again. And to be honest, that's one reason why I make these podcasts. These podcasts, I'm essentially documenting what I'm doing, and it's very helpful to crystallize my thoughts. One unexpected outcome that is occurring as a result of doing these podcasts is a process of discovery in terms of how I think about things. In other words, how I used to think about taking notes is I know something and I write down what I know so that I don't forget. And I am still doing that, but now I am also writing down stuff as a process of discovery to actually crystallize what learnings I have learned. In other words, I may start writing notes unsure of the exact learning or unsure of what the thing is. But then as I get thoughts out of my brain and into some sort of visual thing that I can reference back to, then my learnings become incredibly crystallized. And that process alone of documentation, and also seeing the process of documentation as a process of discovery, not just writing down what I know, has been very helpful for me. So we know how to determine whether or not we've learned the right lesson. We know how to ensure that we don't have to repeat the lesson again. Lastly, how do we act despite uncertainty? A lot of times we come across situations in business where we haven't quite learned the lesson, or we don't know what it is yet, but there is uncertainty and we need to make a decision. We need to do something. And what I've learned is that the quicker that we take action, as long as the action increases the likelihood it moves us closer to our goals, then the better of an entrepreneur that we become. And when I'm going through something uncertain, I've realized I can ask myself a set of questions, and the answers to those questions will help reveal the best possible next action to take. So here are some of the questions that I ask myself. Have I been doing what I'm currently doing long enough to reasonably see a change in outcome? In other words, if I'm going through something difficult and there's uncertainty, it means that I'm doing something and the outcome that I want is not quite there. Have I been doing it long enough where I should reasonably see some sort of outcome? If the answer is yes, then it could be an indication that, okay, well, that means we may need to consider taking another action. Another question I ask myself is, what do other people who have achieved the outcome that I am after, what do they say about the situation? And then lastly, will changing my behavior or taking some sort of action move me closer or further away to my goals? So I'm going to give you a silly fitness example. I was working with a trainer for about 2 to 3 years. And this trainer was excellent. Drastically improved my mobility, drastically improved my ability to create like a workout that produces variety. And so it keeps me entertained, keeps me, wanting to go back to the gym. I learned a lot about nutrition with this individual, just very, very helpful. Well, at about the 2-year mark, I shifted my goal of what I wanted out of fitness, and I wanted something a little bit different. Well, after about 6 to 8 months of a different outcome and working with this individual, I wasn't really getting much closer to the outcome, or the rate at which I was getting closer was much slower than it really should have taken. And I really struggled with the decision of what to do next. And a big part of the reason was because I needed to make a decision of if the trainer was the right person to get me where it is that I wanted to go. And I ultimately decided to part ways with that trainer. And it has been now 7 weeks since that have happened. And in the first 6 weeks of me doing something different, the results that I have achieved, I am incredibly closer to my outcome than the entire 6 to 8 months of previously working with this individual. And so my goal next time anything like that occurs, the fact that it took 6 to 8 months for me to take an action is unacceptable. I need to figure out how I can decrease the amount of time that happens in the future. And therefore, if I take some sort of different action sooner, that is going to decrease the amount of time between where I am now and where it is that I want to go. And had I asked myself those 3 questions earlier in the situation, then the answers to those questions would have revealed that it is reasonable for me to take a different action. I could have taken that action sooner, and I could be closer to where it is that I want to be. And my biggest learning there is we're never going to have all of the concrete information that we need to make a decision. But what we do have are these indicators, or we can come up with these questions that we can ask ourselves, whose answers reveal whether or not it might be an action that we need to take that's going to move us closer to our goals. And what happens a lot is when we need to make these decisions in the midst of uncertainty, there are roadblocks that make not making the decision easier. For example, If making the decision involves having a difficult conversation, oh my gosh, like we will do everything to come up with a logical reason on why we don't need to have that difficult conversation. And in reality, if we simply come up with these questions that we can ask ourselves that are fundamentally rooted in principles of, is this going to move me closer to my goals? Or what do other people who have achieved the outcome that I have, what do they say about the situation? And then we, boom, take drastic action. It's okay that we don't know what will happen. We don't need to know what will happen. In fact, the only thing that we need to know is, will taking this action increase or decrease the likelihood that I will get closer? And the reality is, the more that we take actions whose answer to that question is yes, it will increase the likelihood of me getting closer to my goals, then that's all we need. And what happens is that the more actions we take where the answer to the question is that we will get closer to our goals, then over time we become fundamentally more skilled in taking action without the certainty that we need. And I'm harping on this because there's nothing more critical, or let me rephrase, there is nothing that will slow you more as an entrepreneur than waiting for 100% certainty that something will happen before you make a decision. By the time that happens, the conditions could be entirely different. Your competitors could surpass you. And the quicker that we can act despite uncertainty, then the faster that we're going to get closer to where it is that we want to go. And so these are all things that I have been thinking through in order for me to continue to level up as an entrepreneur. And as I documented these thoughts and as I kind of crystallized these learnings, I wanted to pass them on to you because I thought they might be helpful. If it was helpful, you can let me know by sharing it. Share it on Instagram. You can share it with other people. If it wasn't, that's cool too. But I hope you can use this to know whether or not that you learned the right lesson, to ensure that you don't repeat it again, and to act despite uncertainty. I appreciate you guys. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.